Welcome back, everybody. I'm David Carroll at the Department of English at the American University of Beirut. It's my pleasure to be chairing this panel, Digital Remediations. A couple of program notes before I introduce the panelists. Lunch will be in the lobby area at 1:30. This panel will conclude punctually. There are various areas in which we can circulate to eat our lunch, including the gazebo area outside, but also, importantly, upstairs there will be a poster display concurrent with Professor Risley's presentation. So be sure to go up there and enjoy the posters, and the students who have made them will also be there to provide commentary. I'm going to introduce our speakers all at once at the beginning. We will hear their papers consecutively and then have a common discussion period at the end. Our first speaker is Thorsten Wolliner, who is a researcher here at OIB. He has studied at the University of Jena and holds his doctorate from the Free University of Berlin. His research interests encompass the pre-modern history and literature of the Near East, in particular Syrian and Egyptian historiography between the Mamluk and Ottoman eras, and how it reflects shifts and changes in audience, authorship, genres, and their social and literary functions. His presentation today is titled Working with Books in the Digital Age, A User's Perspective. Our second speaker is Till Grallert. He is also a researcher at OIB and also the holder of a doctoral degree from the Free University of Berlin. His current research project aims at establishing a genealogy of urban food riots in the Eastern Mediterranean as a genre of contention between the 18th and mid-20th centuries. In addition, he has developed a strong interest in digital humanities and the sociolinguistics of early Arabic newspapers. His presentation today is titled Majalat al-Muktabas, Between Grey Online Libraries, Large-Scale Scanning Efforts and Programming Tools, Producing Fully Open, Collaborative and Scholarly Editions of Early Arabic Periodicals. Our third speaker is David Risley, who is Associate Professor in the Departments of English and the Civilization Studies Program at the American University of Beirut and a former Chair of English at AUB. He's a comparatist medievalist and digital humanist with interests in the history of translation and rewriting, particularly in the 15th century court of Burgundy. He is also interested in Mediterranean polysystems linking post-classical Arabic and European literatures, as well as digital means for archiving and visualizing them. He is currently working on a project about space, place and time in medieval texts entitled Visualizing Medieval Places. In his presentation, conjuring a phrase that has been spoken already today, Beirut publishes digital spatio-temporal narratives of the Lebanese publishing industry from 1920 to the present. So I invite Thorsten to begin this panel.
Thank you very much. I hope everyone can hear me, and I hope the slides will help to understand what I'm trying to say. I stuck with a very general title, and this is due to the obstacles I had to overcome in the course of preparing this presentation, which is that I feel like I'm kind of in between, like a traditional scholars working with print or manuscript materials and making use, as many of us, of digital copies or digital remediations of such texts or books. We'll see about that. So I'll start with a thought process about what that actually means, that we're now in the digital age and working with books in different formats. Like, I'll kind of build on what especially has been said in the keynote yesterday, but also I think it connects to a couple of statements that we've heard since the day before. I'll start with a quote, which I found in the book, but originally comes from a newspaper. I won't read it out, I'll leave that to you. I'll just point out a few interesting things that are pointed out by this quote by a fictional author, an author of fiction, which I myself really have followed since my teen years. In the year 2000, he spoke about the future of books and the future, like in the digital age, And while his quote is in some parts already outdated 15 years further, 16 years further, it also touches upon the very core of both the operational and the epistemological challenge digitalization is still continuing to represent also for the humanities, but not only for the humanities. And yeah, he points out two things in general, which I seem to have forgotten. So since I have only 20 minutes, I'll continue with the question, what is a book? A book is both a textual item, which is defined by a title, and a physical object, which you could say is defined by its binding. Although this already excludes the scroll as a form of, or which might be considered a book, both in our modern terminology or maybe as a part of shu or kitab or what have you. So I think that this difference between the textual item and the physical object is kind of obscured by print. Also because there's the one version that is reproduced again and again, and whatever differs from this version is kind of worse than what is considered the original text. And this approach is kind of followed especially in the editing process, not only with regard to Arabic manuscripts, but also in general. Like an edition turns a manuscript into a book, and then this is an authoritative version of the text and maybe also of the physical object. I think that the differentiation between textual item and physical object is much more obvious in manuscript culture. And to quote, there has been a recent a recent volume of the Journal of Arabic and Islamic Studies, which has investigated notions and concepts of the book, or maybe also the non-book, in the age of Arabic manuscript culture. They expressly excluded the digital book from their exploration. So in Arabic we have a large number of terms which is available to denote a book, either in one way or in the other. Kitab has been mentioned already by Stefan Leder yesterday. There is of course musannaf and muallaf as notions of work. There is the juz, which has been mentioned by Stefan Leder. There's also the mujallad, the mujallad refers to a volume in our understanding, or a codex in our understanding. And one book can consist, of course, of several volumes, or one volume can consist of several texts. If there are books, that's debatable. And Konrad Hirschler investigated the notions of the book in a 13th century library catalogue. In the meantime, his book about this library catalogue has come out this year. And so what he can show is that the author of this catalogue, he started out by defining books in an alphabetical order, no, in a thematic order, sorry, like starting from the Quran and then going down through the hierarchy of disciplines. And he defined them as cohesive textual items, again subsumed under one title each. But then he came to the letter mim, under which you find all the majami' or collective volumes, and suddenly he was baffled. So what to do with that? So he switched to the other, to the other idea of the book, and started to define them as physical objects, giving them numbers or signs in order to refer what's in there. So we have this idea of the book, and if you ask someone, do you know what a book is, he or she will answer, yes, of course. But then if we have to explain, it gets much more difficult, especially if you look at long traditions such as the Arabic manuscript tradition. We'll get back to this. So, and of course this remains a question in the digital age as well, and with regard to what the digital book can be. So we should also not forget the physical item, because apart from authorship, there can be a certain agency also in the compilation, and I don't think I say anything controversial here. So this is the entry for the Majmua in the Chester Beatty Library Catalogue. And this is just an excerpt. There are altogether 15 items in this volume, and there is a certain theme going through it. So this is not done by the individual authors, but there is a second entity that has an agency over the compilation of this material. And I did not have the chance to look at this in particular, but I think you can already see that this is a work this is kind of an anthology of Sufi knowledge. So, which is then defined by the physical codex. So let's move to the digital. In my idea, the digital has a position somewhere between print and manuscript, and the other two presentations will show how it also goes beyond those two established media. It has in common with the print that one-time publication is possible, and you'll have a finished text that you can access starting from that time. And then you have one version that is copied or is accessible from different people in different places, or also hopefully at different times. We'll see how that goes in the future. On the other side, it has in common with the manuscript that you have constant revisions, and you can make these constant revisions possible, so you also can trace the history or the emergence of a certain text. And you have the chance of multiple voices in one place, mostly by commentary sections, but there are new projects also where you can, take a crowdsourcing approach to make certain works accessible, where you can read the comments at the same time as you read the authoritative book. And last but not least, it has the layout, which you can see all together in this beautiful manuscript of one of Ibn Tulun's texts. And now I forgot to mention the name, and I also forgot to remember the name. It's a work about the Damascene citadel. It's a very short work of some 16 folios, and as you can see, there's you have it in the layout already. You have you have the original text, which in this instance is not written, it's not a copy not an autographed copy. Then you have comments, and you have further things like highlighted words and a finding help, a thematic finding help. So, what I want to mention here is that the digital also offers itself to a kind of subversive approach to not only Arabic literature, because we can reproduce now very easily even minor works, not only the works as we have seen in Hala Auji's presentation yesterday, that are deemed fit to print in not only in a way that not only renders the text but renders the whole page as it is done in manuscripts. So what can be the digital book then? In a way, we have used the first instance of the digital book. Almost all of us, we have used images from images of a manuscript, singular images of a manuscript that's physical, original is stored somewhere else. A second option is, of course, we render the text of the manuscript, also more readable than it has been until then. And this is, of course, a way that had also been taken by editions in print. And the third one is that goes beyond both print and manuscript, is that we can make these texts also machine readable and accessible for a large-scale analysis and contextualization of certain works. And furthermore, digitalization urges us to reassess the epistemological foundations on which our own work relies, because most of us work these days mostly with digital copies of, not only of manuscripts but also of printed books. This, of course, as has been said yesterday, changes also not only the medium, but it creates a whole new product. So, and the problem that I see with the digital book is that if we concentrate on one of these aspects, we might be at the danger of neglecting one or two of the other. So, an answer out of this is, no, not an answer out of this, but like at the same time the digitalization offers us a way out of this. Like different from printed editions, maybe we don't have to decide anymore, especially whether we want to see the book as a textual or a physical item. As you can see up here, you can decide between contents and the physical description. Oh, okay. So I'll skip this and just show you this shortly while I'm if it works. Yeah. So this is finally the last stage that we get to. Like if we can do that, yeah, it just will go on. This is the result of a large-scale analysis of texts through machine-readable algorithms. I can't do that yet. We'll see where that goes in, to a certain extent, in David's paper. So, two things that we have to keep in mind with regard to working with digital manuscripts. Like, if we want to see what manuscripts, like, if we want to deal with manuscripts, we have to look at the context, and the survival bias has also been already been addressed by Stefan Leder earlier. There's also a digitization bias, and as we have seen in the last 2 days, more beautiful manuscripts are more prone to be digitized now because it looks nice. But this also distorts our notion of what texts actually are. And also, I have to urge about the. Don't look at this. I have to urge for better catalogization, because catalogization gives you good catalogization gives you an impression of what is actually there, and only then we can see the real importance of certain works. This is just a list that has not been done institutionally, but by one scholar on his own blog, a list of manuscript repositories that you can find online. I'll just jump ahead over these and get back to the survival bias and get to my own project. How much time do I have left?
10 minutes max.
10 minutes max, great. So let's get to Ibn Tulun. Ibn Tulun, a Damascene scholar on which I'm currently working. He makes it kind of easy for us to deal with the survival bias in regard to his own work, because he has made a list of the works that he wrote in his own autobiography, which incidentally is not complete according to manuscripts that you can find. So we have some 700 works by him, and a second thing that is important to note, we have most of these works in autographs, which is because he endowed them as a complete library in a madrasa in Damascus. So, yeah. But like he calls them, I'm not sure, I think he calls them kutub, but they're not all kutub. They're sometimes only 4 folios long. So we again have the different ideas of the book, and this corpus is interesting to explore these ideas of the book as well. For instance, we have a number of, like we know from his biographers that he himself compiled his smaller works, which he called Taliqat, as well as the correspondence that he had with Shah Allah ibn Fahd, a Meccan scholar that was a contemporary of his, into volumes in order to store them in the library. And this tells us that actually, like maybe and this is also my idea about knowledge production in this time, that we actually have the book as a means of archive, at least in the physical sense, because everything else might be lost if it's just loose paper. So, then I just want to show how to approach one of those works with regard to digital means, and I have to say I'm an amateur, and it will look also like the work of an amateur. The work is one of his bigger works. It's a biographical dictionary, which he composed towards the end of his life. We see in the introduction that he mentions dates in the 1540s, a couple of years before his death. We also have certain information from him about where he sets that in the literary tradition. So how do we approach a book that has some 269 folios, some 900 entries? Actually, I do that maybe very badly. So sometimes I copy the text that is there like in the Arabic version. Sometimes I just translate it into English because I need it at that time. But it has to be made accessible, and it's all I have is a digital copy, which just is images. So, in the end, it's all about organization of knowledge, and in a way, the biographical dictionaries as a whole, they're quite good examples of how knowledge is structured. So usually you have works structured by alphabet, but then the problem is like, what is the name that refers to the alphabet? Is it the ism, or is it the lakab, or what is it? So these are different parts of the names for those people who don't know. Then you have an implicit organization of knowledge that I think we don't yet understand completely. There is cross-references. There are people who don't even have a biography, or do have a biography that are mentioned in biographies of other people, but those people are not mentioned in their own. Maybe that's a future application for hypertext as well. Yeah. So I'll skip the other ways. This is my way of approaching the text, which is that I had first created a searchable document which in order to, I keep in mind future uses, if I'm more versed in programming, I prepare my documents already with an eye for that. So I have prepared just a document of the structure, which includes the introduction and the chapters that come before the biographies, and then the number of biographies with different different headings, so different levels of headings. This can then be transferred and this will be explained by Till's chapter a bit more. If we transfer that to XML language, this is to be done automatically. Already now it helps me just by word search to find certain people that I'm looking for. So what I'm doing at the moment is I transfer these pages, which are readable for the human eye but not readable for a machine, into something else. This is about textual information. What is more interesting, maybe even with regard to the double nature of the book, is that also, like in this copy, we have information about the physical state. So the copyist, which I presume was one of the students of Ibn Tulun, always has this little mentioning here, which says that this is actually this gap of text has been there in the original manuscript. Right? You see here is a gap that results from whitewashing of text, and only after that is a gap that is not. I'm really sorry for the other room. I hope you see that. Okay. Good. And this can also be translated in the XML language. So here you have that. So the third step is going to the XML language, and I think I have 2 minutes left about. Yeah. So this is the encoding of the text, and you have several information here. So you have Arabic texts. For those who are not familiar with it, the next slide will show it in a more human readable version. And then you have different tags that you can see, and we also have information about the physical state. On this one now there is no gap, but we have the line breaks, and then we have the page breaks. So here you see the next folio starts. or the next page starts. So, and the interest in this is for me, even if I'm not able to do that still, like the machinery will think is that I can find things again. Things that belong to a certain category and are not always the same item. So, for instance, I find persons. I can look for all the persons, even with a normal search in a certain document or in a number of documents, also for places or for book titles. So this is how it looks now. It's not very fancy, but you can see you have the Arabic text, and then you have, in this case, it's a commentary or it's a comment by me in English, partly translation. I should not switch between these. So here, and then you have both the tagging of persons, for instance, here in Arabic, and then here again in English. So the conclusion. I have time. So for the conclusion, I just jump to the work that is behind this, because I also have problems like getting away, like imagining the book away from the text in some way, and my interest is first and foremost in the text. So this book is interesting for a number of reasons. The most interesting thing for me, or the most stunning thing for me, is that actually books are highlighted here more than people as authorities of knowledge. And what Ibn Tulun did apparently not only in his spare time, is that I don't know where he found them, but he not only went to libraries to read books, but as we can see here, he went to consult writing by several persons. It is more obvious, or it seems more easy to explain to me why he would include poetry. But then again, he also finds transcripts from historical sources done by several people of several occupational backgrounds. There's As-Safadi is quoted, Ibn Kathir is quoted, and not by himself, but by the people that wrote these pieces that only survive here in this book. So in this way, this book, this biographical dictionary could be a major source on the whole culture of writing, and a major source on the exploration of the term book, or what is meant by that, in the 15th and 16th century. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So I already got an introduction to XML, so I'll stay from that introduction to that. You'll see angled brackets very briefly only, I can assure you. And let's see if the projector actually starts up. Just otherwise, yeah. There we go. And as you have already noticed, I'm guilty of title inflation. Very sort of mid-19th century book titles. The book within which you will hear a lot about this and that, and it's all excitingly interesting. The slides are online, so if you have a laptop in front of you, you can just follow along. There are links inside which you might want to consult. The project website as such is also mentioned there. There is a blog which looks not that pretty, but we just set it up in order to document what we are doing, and it is a good entryway into the edition that I'm talking about. So let's start with the Journal of Al-Muqtabas, and I brought a real physical copy with me, sort of to get redemption from my digital efforts to have a full, proper physical item in front of me. It's the 5th volume of Journal of Al-Muqtabas. It was supposedly a monthly journal published by Muhammad Ali, whom I'm sure everybody knows pretty well, between 1906 and the end of First World War. The end of publication date is not particularly clear, and publication started in Cairo, and after the Young Turk Revolution, Muhammad Ali and his journal, and then the daily newspaper of the same title, moved to Damascus. The extent is about 9 volumes of 96 issues. At least 2 of them are double issues. I think there are more, but I have still to establish that. And altogether we talk about a corpus of about 7,000 pages of Arabic text. The journal is not one of the smallest. It is kind of available at different libraries dispersed throughout the world. it is interesting, and we have about 30 libraries who claim to have copies of al-Muqtabas that I have found in America, Europe, and the Middle East. Most of these, however, are incomplete collections, and the vast majority is a copy from a single source. It's copies of the microfilm source from the microfilm project in Chicago. So literally, it is sort of part, as already was mentioned, of this very limited number of copies all originating from a single source, even though we usually presume that periodicals are available in multiple copies in these large print runs, and they should be available. Yet, what we have is actually a single original and multiple later remediations on microfilm. And why am I talking about journals? Is that too loud actually to noise? I think it has, no? Okay. I think we should talk about the importance of these mundane texts in periodicals. First of all, they are at the core of various discourses at the end of the 19th century or early 20th century, the end of the Ottoman Empire in the region. That is the discourse on modernity, or modernism, depending on how you want to frame it, the Arabic Renaissance that Hala talked about, Arab nationalism, Islamic reform movement, etc. And they form very large corpora with an equal distribution of text along a temporal axis, right? In particular in the journals from Cairo, which I have written onto this slide. So Al-Muqtabas itself is rather a short-lived journal compared to Al-Manar or Al-Muqtataf with these immensely long periods of publication that lend themselves to linguistic analysis and the analysis of change over time, linguistic change over time. And particularly the field that I'm interested in, the historical semantics and how certain concepts were translated from Ottoman into Arabic, etc. And of course the immensely helpful data sets for social history. As you heard, I'm working on food rights, so prices, price indices, etc. is material that I'm interested in, and it would be lovely to have it readily available in machine-readable form to produce various statistics on the development of food prices, for instance. So, but there is a twofold problem when it comes to these journals. The one thing is preservation, the other is an access problem. Preservation, of course, as we know, is challenged by the active destruction of cultural artifacts that we see in the region, but not just in the region, it's not just Daesh. It's also, of course, university administrations, libraries that tend to argue once an item has been digitized, we can throw it away. Well, infrastructure is cut back, libraries are closed, opening hours are cut short, etc. So it's not just Daesh who's threatening cultural artifacts. Of course, they are to Beirut for a lot of things, or the American invasion in Iraq that we heard about earlier. And of course, the material itself is of a fragile nature. The materiality itself doesn't lend itself well to preservation because it was printed on cheap paper and has not been protected with the same care as these valuable manuscripts have been. In terms of access, the destruction of infrastructure, of course, is the main obstacle, but there's also a lack of access to institutions, to hardware, to software, internet connections in the region, right? If we have a fancy website with a lot of large, high-resolution facsimiles, you cannot use it from Lebanon because our internet connections do not provide the bandwidth that you would need to use them. And we have to think about these issues. Of course, the other issue is that collections are widely dispersed, so scholars would need to travel, and the absence of reliable OCR technology is something that we all have come across, even if we don't talk about it digital at all. And I would argue that in consequence, what Thorsten called the digitization bias is that we have a focus on high culture and canonical texts. So it's the beautiful illustrated manuscripts that are digitized. So what is the state of digitization in the field of Arabic journals or Arabic texts in general, late 19th century? We have on the one hand textual digital texts that are provided by great online libraries. I'm sure everybody used them. We're usually quiet about using them because they're kind of dodgy, but I'm sure all of you know Maktab al-Shamila, Mishkat, Fawa'id, etc., Al-Waraq. They're widely used. They come with a lot of problems, right? There's a lack of metadata, there's faulty metadata, acting principles are unknown, quality of the text as such, you know nothing about them, and thus you cannot properly use them, particularly not for scholarly works where you have to reliably cite your sources. And the other platform that you all are aware of is digital imagery, facsimile editions such as HathiTrust. Again, access to HathiTrust is restricted to member institutions, so AUB faculty, of course, has access, or students. Other people in Lebanon do not. Endangered Archives program is important to mention because somebody already used their digitizations. It's a program run with very little money by the British Library to protect endangered archives and their other collections. Again, they have the same problems, the lack of metadata, faulty catalogization of items, licenses and limited licenses, and the question of paywalls is a huge issue, and text layers, of course, are almost completely absent. HeartTrust provides some sort of a search, but you're never sure what you get because you have no idea about the quality of the text or corpus. So what do we suggest as a solution? Pretty simple. Unite the digital facsimile with a digital transcription from the Gray online library and validate the transcription with the help of the facsimile. We also want to improve the transcription with the help of a crowd, something that needs to be defined, that needs to be sort of attended to, that needs to be cherished, and we have to advertise the project for that. We also want to make everything citable for scholars, so we have to run reliable bibliographic metadata and linkable and usable for machines. So to hook everything together, because at the end of the day we're actually interested in a discourse as it moves between different papers, right? You want to see an article from Al-Muqtabas that replies to Al-Manar, and in a perfect world you have actually access to this article from Al-Manar that then points to another article from Al-Muqtadaf, etc. And we want to see this discourse at the end of the day. And we want to see how these texts travel, how the people actually negotiate issues within this larger corpus. And for the sake of access, we provide the new edition with the broadest possible license, and that is a Creative Commons license. Everything should be based on a number of principles, that is, to repurpose available and established tools in order not to reinvent the wheel and to save money, which we don't have, and to keep it as simple as possible in order to enable people with restricted access to hardware, software, internet connections to actually use the stuff that we are building. So our test case, Majalat al-Muqtabas, and I just briefly show you images before I actually go into the details. So this is the web view. On the left-hand side, you see the digital transcription. On the right-hand side, you see facsimile, in this case from Endangered Archives Program. Both are aligned, and it has a number of features that I will talk about. Of course, the digital text, Torsten already shown us, is an XML file that might look like that, and you can't see anything because resolution is too low, so I explain the details. But what do we do? At the base layer, we provide an XML TI edition of all 96 issues. We link the text, as I said, to the digital facsimiles, i.e. every page break is linked to a digital representation of the page, and license everything under Creative Commons attribution and reuse license. That is, as long as you mention you use it, you can do with it what you want. Core feature is that it is a social digital edition. The idea is to gradually improve the text and markup over the course of time. Since we know so many instances where two historians work on the same material and they do the same work over and over and over again just because nobody ever thought of sharing the corrections to the metadata, etc. And that's what we hope to provide. And as sugar on top, it should be usable, and we provide a static web view which has the advantage of not requiring permanent internet connections. You can download it and run it on your own computer. And we provide bibliographic metadata for all issues, articles, etc. in common bibliographic standards, so you can link it into your reference management software that you might or might not use. And we provide access by means of a Zotero group. I spare you the details of the project layout. It's a fancy picture, and I thought it would be nice to have, but I'm not going to talk through that. So how do we produce the digital TI edition? What we basically do is we download all the text from Maktaba Shamila. We transform it almost completely automatically into TI XML, and TI XML. TI is a text encoding initiative, which I think most of you have heard about, that have a long-standing tradition of producing digital remediations of text over the last 30 years. It's sort of community standard, widely used, and nowadays required by a lot of funding bodies if you produce editions. We add structural markup. We designate articles as articles, headers as headers, author names as authors, etc., which can be done semi-automatically but has to be proofread. And then we link, as I said, the digital facsimiles into the text, and this is the most laborious industrious process because you can't automate that process at all. The actual location of the page break in the text flow has to be established by a human editor. So it's 7,000 clicks at least that you have to provide at one point. And then we host everything on a popular code sharing platform, GitHub, which provides version control. So everything is credited. Every contribution by everyone is credited, transparent, and can be, of course, also revoked. And at the end, as I said, write everything under the broadest possible license. I spare the details on legality. We think it is legal. You can come up to me and question that later, but I think I don't bore you with that at the moment. So the core feature of continuous improvement. How do we do that? On the one hand, we, as I said, we want to correct the transcription and gradually add markup. We also want to improve, of course, the derivative works based on the textual layout. If you improve the structural markup, of course, the automatically generated bibliographic metadata on the individual item becomes better, in the sense that it has a more reliable quality, it is more detailed, page numbers are actually correct, publication dates are correct, etc. So we have an upstream stack of software that then automatically provides improvements. And if you want to contribute and say, oh, I worked on Muqtabas extensively and I have a lot of improvements to it and I can tell you the authors of this and that article, the way to contribute is outlined here. The only thing you actually need is access to GitHub, which is free, and you can right away start editing the files. And what I briefly want to show is, at the bottom you see the network of the genealogy of our digital text in a way, different contributors contributing different parts, and then changes being merged, rejected, etc. So you can actually follow the editing process of our digital edition. And what I wanted to show you is a live view in a way. This is what you see on GitHub. It looks pretty boring. It's a number of folders and descriptions. But if you say, I have to change to a particular file, what you can do is you can directly edit it on this platform, or you can use something that is Oxygen, an XML editing software, and they now have a web platform that can hook into your GitHub account, so you don't have to download software. You only have to tell them, here's the project, and I'm not doing that live. It is free-ish. At the moment, it's beta, so it is free to use. I guess at some point they will charge money for it. Yet at the moment, it's functional. And what you could do, actually, this is a volume of Muqtabas, which has, I selected it because it has a translation of the Qanun Haqq Talif. And I thought it would be appropriate to talk about that in the context of digital remediation and a book conference. And you could immediately start editing and say, whatever, I'm just putting in something randomly, right? It behaves like a text editor, even though it has the angled brackets. It looks like Word, so don't be afraid. It's not dangerous, they don't bite you, they might poke you occasionally, but it is usable. It's an interface we're used to, right? It looks as everything else looks. Okay. Sorry. So, the sugar on top, the web view, the interface that on the one hand I think is important but is usually overrated because of course at the end of the day we're interested in functionality and reliable text and not necessarily the way it looks. Yet on the other hand, having to look at it for about 10 hours a day, aesthetics become important and we have to rally for acceptance in the scholarly community. So what we provide is a web view in a browser-based interface. It is human-readable, a static web view. It can be downloaded, you can use it on your own USB key, as I said. And it has a parallel display of text and imagery. And let's try a live demo. Oh yeah, there's the Qanun Haqq Talif. So basically what we see here is right and left two-panel view. We provide an automatically generated table of content of the issue with page numbers, etc., author names, so you can easily jump and browse through the issue as you would expect it. All the red parts are actually links, apart from, and there you see editorial interventions into the text. Publication date was obviously wrong, so we corrected it, and you see the correction process documented in the web view here. What do I mean by reliably cited? The one thing is you can click on every heading, and if you then copy the URL, this URL is stable. So you can, as long as you have this URL, you will always end up at the same location in the text. So they're not created on the fly in a dynamic environment, but they're stable, hard-linked URLs. So you can reliably reference every section. And this is at the moment true down to the paragraph level. So you can, every paragraph is individually referenceable if you wanted to do that. Which becomes important, of course, in machine applications. And then on the left side, you see facsimile. At the moment, we load the Endangered Archives Program facsimiles because the license is the broadest one available. Half trust is limited, but you could load different facsimiles into the interface depending on your access rights. It's already there. And then finally, there is the link to the bibliographic metadata on the article level. I'm a historian, so I want to cite stuff, which is why I thought we have to have the bibliographic metadata on every article right there to be cited. Okay, I gloss over this in a bit. There is a bibliographic database that we set up. We collected all our bibliographic metadata into an open public Zotero group, which you might be familiar with, Zotero, the reference managing software. So you can actually use that as an index to Al-Maktabas right now. It's online, live, and it links again back to all the articles. So you can actually access the edition through that group. And the final thing that I want to present is a use case. Why the heck do we do that? And I thought Books in Motion is a nice topic, and in a way it links to David's talk immediately. What you see here, Al-Maktabas had a review section. And what we did, we marked up all the bibliographic information in the review section, retrieved it, and then mapped the publication places of the books reviewed in Al-Maktabas. It's still effective because we have not completed the entire collection. But what you see, in a way, is interesting, and this is a live map. What I think is interesting, on one hand, the almost complete absence of the Maghrib from the books reviewed. It's not surprising to see Cairo in this large group of books published in Cairo. What is surprising that this dot, you remember Al-Maktabas was published in Damascus? Damascus is not a prominent publication place at the time, surprisingly in a way. Even Baghdad is like there are more books from Baghdad reviewed in Al-Maktabas than there are books from Damascus. Again, these are not statistically sound findings as long as we don't have a complete, finished digital edition. You can say, now I have the definite numbers of reviews, but based on 2 volumes that we have almost completed, these are first tentative findings, what you could possibly do with these structural machine-readable data. And what I would be interested in a way, is that not only the places, but to see how long does it take between publication of a title to review in Al-Maktabas. Like how long does a book from Calcutta, for instance, take to travel to Damascus or to be recognized worthy of review. We don't have neither the correct publication dates of the journal nor the publication dates of the titles yet, so this is future work that I would be interested in. But it's one of the questions that I started with. Why I'm doing this stuff is because I'm rather interested in these questions, and at the end of the day I still have to produce a digital edition. So, final concluding remarks, if I have another minute. I would argue that our experiences are pretty positive. It's simple technologies with relatively little coding. We have no. I'm like the one who sort of provided all the coding stuff, and I'm by no means a coder. And the initial setup took about 4 weeks of after-hour labor, which is not that much compared to these very large-scale digitizing projects. Hosting is free. So we have no hosting costs whatsoever. Beyond our own labor cost, we have no costs that are incurred. And I know I'm feeding into a particular discourse on and that you can label neoliberal, and that we should be critical of that. Of course, the core feature of page breaks cannot be automated. We have to advertise the project and ask people to provide a bit of labor time to actually put in the page break. Our interns are a great source for that, so I have to thank them. And particularly Dimitar, who's not with us anymore, who spent the last 6 weeks marking page breaks. And the great thing is that you can repurpose the code, and I did that for a smaller journal, the Al-Haqa'iq 3-year journal, also published in Damascus. And setting up the Al-Haqa'iq journal took only a day once the code was available. Of course, page breaks are still the same issue, but once the framework is in play, we can adopt it rather quickly to other journals. As long as you have a transcript from one of the great libraries and some digital facsimiles, you're good to go. And yes, I leave you with a summary on the slide and hand over to David. Thank you. Good day.
Good work. Which one? I don't know what is the function. I tried 4 and tried 7, so I usually do.
Is the computer on and running? Or just, I don't know whether actually
It was running and
Was
on.
it?
Let's see here.
because it has an HDMI port.
But my HDMI doesn't work.
I know, but let's try. Can we come back to that one?
Usually it's here. It's usually function.
There you go. Yeah. Because I have no idea whether this is what's mine. No? Is it hooked up to the supply? Or is the laptop bad? Otherwise, just use mine. If that's okay with you.
It just doesn't have it downloaded.
Ah. Shit. Do you want to try this? On the fly before we upload our way to
Let's just wait 1 second.
Okay.
It's bad.
Okay.
No, but we're not on the screen yet. I don't know what that is. That's me.
Okay.
There we go. There we go.
Yes.
Okay. I don't want to. All right, so a brief note today before I begin the presentation. This paper was really written over the last 3 weeks in a live wiki format by myself and my students who are all sitting in the other room, and some in here. And so what I mean by that is actually it's a co-production, right? It was mostly scaffolded by myself, but with the input and project experience from the members of a senior seminar combined with a graduate course in the Department of English at the American University of Beirut. And so it's really important for me to say that because 2 of the deliverables of the class, a database and a digital map gallery, were also collectively built. So consider the remarks that I'm making today really a kind of collation of the collective thinking of about 12 people over the last semester. And the project here today, which is entitled Mapping Beirut Print Culture, which is I'm going to call my alternative title, my replacement title to the one that was on the program, embodies a number of tensions between the popular and the scholarly, between the local and the global, between the quantitative and the qualitative, and there are tensions that I'm going to try to frame in my paper today. So what you see on the screen actually is the live website. I'm going to go to it in just a little bit later under construction. My PowerPoint actually has the web address, so if you have a device with you today, you can actually follow along with that. The web address here is mbpc, mappingbeirutprintculture.djwizard.com, and that will remain after the conference, so you're welcome to use it for whatever is useful for you. I will say this is, because it has a map gallery in it, it's not really very good responsive design, so my suggestion is to use it on the full screen as opposed on a tablet. You can see, but you can't move and interact with the maps. So it's best done really from more like a laptop. So as the project has come to be known as the Mapping Beirut Print Culture Project, embodies many of the elements of what we might call a public humanities project, a public humanities in the digital age, or rather a digital humanities project embodied in public learning and fieldwork, as well as critical and ethical reflection about a society of letters that has changed around us and that continues to change around us. So the title of the paper, or the original paper, Beirut publishes, well, Beirut Tatba, right, is excerpted from a famous saying that is commonly attributed to Egyptian intellectual Taha Hussein, which goes, Egypt writes, Beirut publishes, and Baghdad reads, right? And there are sort of kind of refrain in 20th century Arab intellectual history, exists with some variations. The end sometimes is not Baghdad, sometimes we hear Iraq, or sometimes it's Sudan, or sometimes it's Khartoum, or it's other places in the Arab world. it points to a cliche, but also to a kind of intellectual and commercial labor division in the region that has a kind of a grain of truth to it. As we've seen throughout the conference, Lebanon has been a pivotal location for the creation of print objects, and not just the publishing, but as the word tabak, it gives us the printing of objects, right? So there's a lot of different things that have passed through Beirut, so it's no wonder that a conference about the mobility of books would be convened in such a city. Literary studies have witnessed in recent years a number of methodological waves introduced or influenced by digital environments. We heard about the creation of digital editions today. It's really the comeback of the critical edition in digital format. The introduction of new archival forms and practices using databases and linked data. And the computational analysis that Till referred to of large textual corpora, the latter predicated on a process of basically pattern searching, right? Looking for repetition over a large amount of text, which in some quarters has been called distant or even algorithmic reading. So our project, the Mapping Beirut Print Culture Project, does not deal with direct textual interpretation or really with corpus level reading, although it does have a little bit of this distant approach, which I'm going to discuss in a minute. It seeks to identify the kinds of publications that were historically prevalent in publication in Beirut, as well as spaces in which such print materials were and continue to be located. It is what one might call a topical spatial history of Beirut print culture, and it's inscribed fully within a double turn in literary studies, one being a book history turn, which many of you belong to here, and the other one I would call a digital spatial turn. So the project is embedded in the seminar, as I mentioned, at the American University of Beirut in the Department of English, and this came about in conversation with Sonia on a meeting with my chair, knowing that the conference was coming up, and when I was looking for a way to venture out into the historical world of publishing, armed with some digital tools for building a database, collecting geographic information, and then creating web maps that have been, well, to be honest, a kind of hallmark of my own research for a couple of years now. So really kind of the inspiration for this particular project came reading Franck Mermier's Le Livre La Ville, Beirut Télévision Arabe, in which he says here, right, and I'll read it and I'll translate it on the fly. So on the other hand, otherwise, the sociology of the world of Arabic editions remains to be an understudied domain, right? With a couple notable exceptions, whose pioneering character has not prevented something like that heuristic ambition. So the idea here is, right, there have been some studies, and who's really, I think who he is referring to here is Maud Stefan Hashem, professor at the Lebanese University, whose thesis in 1988, a doctoral thesis called L'édition du livre au Liban, focuses on precisely unpacking what that actual, like what sort of the contours of that editing world in Lebanon was. Professor Hashem's subsequent research has focused on changing readerships and modes of reading in the 21st century Lebanon, and on the process of the reconstruction, or reconstitution, if you want to call that, of the National Library of Lebanon. So in our seminar, although we were inspired by this idea of sort of walking out into a kind of sociology of the edition, we wanted to number one, not only do sociology of readership, we also did not want to limit our study of print culture to Arabic, as does Mermier. Although, as we have found, there has been a general trend, and you're going to see this in some charts, towards more publication in Arabic in Lebanon, and more movement away from multilingual publishing. As you will have noticed, the newbie people who are visiting Beirut, Beirut is a pretty remarkably multilingual city, has been for a long time, and our findings actually corroborate such a claim. So nor do we want to really limit ourselves only to the world of publishing, which Mermier and then Rosigny and Kafi also did. The two former studies, Mermier and Rosigny, approach really a kind of cultural history of the publishing industry, or embedded inside of political history. And the latter, Kafi, was a thesis that was published from business school at AUB in the 1980s, is that right? 82, something like that? Yeah, 86. Thank you. Somebody's working on that for a paper. So she was interested more in sort of operations and business practices in the industry. So the participants in the projects found themselves drawn to what I call a kind of big tent version of print culture in Lebanon. And these are, I don't know why this is like, it's not supposed to look like a question mark, it just sort of, for whatever reason, like, it didn't come up, it just came up that way. They found themselves sort of drawn into this big tent version, and what I put up on the screen here is actually the tab on the project website called Facets. Because what we did is we essentially created a core project based on in what I'm going to call spatial humanities methodologies, and then alongside of that, students had individual projects curating various aspects, right, of what we might call that big tent of print culture in Lebanon. So, Frangia Tanous, who gave me the date of the package, she went to southern suburbs. She went all the way to Tripoli, looking for data for her project. Some people went all over. They went to a single neighborhood. And so we had sort of macro versions, we had sort of micro versions. We have sometimes generic approaches. We have a project which is just about comic books. And you'll see those in the session which is actually going to follow here, follow this particular panel over lunch, upstairs in the conference room. We have 10 posters that describe that sort of individual curation process by students. Okay, so I lost myself in my paper. What do we mean by Beirut print culture then? So we have this kind of list, this kind of messy list of things. We have artifacts of the printing age. So here we're sort of following on, right? We're not talking about oral products. We're not talking about digital products, really, although the digital does begin to jump in a little bit. We're interested in historic and present day, although we have those are represented to a different extent in the project. They are homegrown or imported objects. Right? So we're not focused only on that which has been produced here, but that which flowed through, right, which moved through Beirut. We're interested in overlapping markets and cultural fields. We're definitely interested in multilingualism. And then as the students who picked their own projects moved out into domains like comic books, magazines, books of all kinds, school publishing, religious books, and different printed materials. And then we have one project which even is interesting because it's predominantly about spaces that are kind of marked with books, but the books kind of just sit there, right? And this is the Cafe Bookstore project, in which the space of identification, right, or even consumption of the written word, even if it's highly indirect or highly commercialized, flowed through coffee, right, seems to be one of the hallmarks. So, it happened again. I'm hitting the wrong key here. All right. So, as I mentioned, I was interested in bringing this around to one of the methodological hallmarks of my work, which is called alternatively geo or spatial humanities. So what is this? This is a kind of branch of the contemporary digital humanities that engages with the location-based phenomenon, or location-based elements of phenomena. So essentially the idea here is mapping location to data, whatever you want it to be. And then what you do with that is then you can then model, represent, and analyze the geographic dimension of any humanistic domain. So this is the word mapping in the beginning of our project is not just a metaphor, right, for surveying the territory. It's actually trying to create interactive digital maps of what actually seems to be happening on the ground. So let's see here. So mapping, what I mean by that, so digital maps that result from this project use GIS technologies. You might know the word GIS, Geographic Information Systems, but they're not strictly a form of cartography. What I mean by that is we don't aim to describe the topographic features of the Earth or the infrastructural elements of built space, but rather the maps found in our map gallery, which I'm going to show you in a minute, you take geotagged data, in other words, that process of locating place with a particular form of information about sites of print culture, and then situate them on what are state-created or public-created normative maps. Right? We're not interested in the creation or the description of the background geography. We're taking that as an assumption. The process of data assemblage that we're doing, in other words, bringing our data and putting it together with other data and other maps, is close to what Bender and Marinin in their book, The Culture of the Diagram, call diagram, or pulling from Deleuze's diagrammatic thinking. And I'm going to read here, a diagram is a proliferation of manifestly selective packets of dissimilar data correlated in an explicitly process-oriented array that has some of the attributes of representation, but is situated in the world like an object. So diagrams are closer in kind to a Jackson Pollock than to a Rembrandt. Okay? So what you can actually imagine then, a diagram could be, right? It could be actually like the top one, and comes from their from the culture of the diagram. This is the depiction of, or the representation of what eye surgery looks like for surgeons who are learning surgery. Now, this is not an eye, and it's not real surgery. It's rather differing flows of levels of information that are put together to simulate what actually might happen in a surgical procedure. So the map that sits below that is a similar kind of a thing. We have a map base which is pulled from another place. We have a set of data which is laid on top of it, and then that data is manipulated in a particular way to make an argument. So one of the things which is extraordinarily important in this class for me is to pass on to my students the idea that a map can actually serve an argument, if not make an argument on its own. And we can pull that together with other information. Now, the only other information that we have here happens to be a background dark map from Nokia, right? But you're going to see in the other examples, we have other intermediary maps that get stuck in between, and layering or assemblage is the way that one comes up with making, let's call spatial patterning arguments. Such diagrams or maps work on what Bender and Marinin call a pact of visualization. There's a suggestion of relationships, right, between the various layers. So practitioners in the geospatial humanities use diagrammatic assemblages with the general aim of exploration and discovery of spatial patterns. I organized a panel in 2013 Modern Language Association called Geospatial Literary Studies, at which a panelist, Kristen Doyle Highland, investigated antebellum print culture in New York City, investigating relationships between a growing city, printers, sellers, ink makers, paper factory, all kinds of things, and resultant print items. And we have, this is one of the maps that was created out of her particular project, that is actually her data, and you can see these black dots, right, that have been overlaid onto what is a historical map. So I invite you to explore this map, this project, as an interdisciplinary, another interdisciplinary example of what it means to do spatial humanities. Doyle Highland's project is firmly situated in the past of New York City, and she used a very highly original means for coming up with her information, both about the location but also the date of operations of the bookstore she was mapping. She went to New York City fire insurance bulletins, right, for address, time of operation, opening of operation, closing of operation, etc. And this is a really inventive and interesting way of finding data which is significant and important, but has nothing to do with sort of really the the Society of Print Culture official publication of data on that particular city and that particular time period. But the problem about working in Lebanon is that the documentation about print culture is not systematically collected. So, and it's actually a bit confusing. So if we look at this, and this is not meant to be at all a diss of the Society of the Syndicate of Lebanese Publishers, we actually get their kind of bilingual version, and actually the information in Arabic and English is different. It says that they have 700 publishers in Lebanon, but we actually only have 200 people registered or 200 institutions registered in the thing. And then on the one hand, they say there's 8,000 publications per year, and on the other hand, they say there's 3,500. So the data is really different, and it's not collected in any kind of systematic way. And it's even contradictory in its bilingual presentation. So the spatial humanities allow us to uncover these kinds of urban, like the locational dimension of historical phenomena. They also allow us to narrate that. And so one of the words which just comes up in spatial humanities is spatial narratives, by which they mean using things like timelines, using maps, using what's called torque, using animated maps, using interactive maps as a way of telling a story, right? Presenting information. The difference is that the way it's presented is not actually publicly received yet. Like, we don't actually completely know as a society how to critically read maps. And this is one of the issues that comes into this. So theorists like Ayers or Presner or Bodenheimer or Travis, who we read in our seminar, would qualify digital maps as having kind of added dimension, right? Meaning that they have that layer of data that's associated with them. They call this thickness, or they call it depth. So I hear people talk about thick mapping or deep mapping, right? Great little modernist trope there. But anyway, the idea is that it's not only that it allows for multiple data, but it also allows for multiple even competing narratives of historical phenomena to be represented and be explored. So this comes to Torsten's idea of the digital edition also being a space of not having to choose, but having it all, right? And having the sort of the user at the center of that exploration process. So I want to just start with a question that we asked in the middle for when we were running out into this project. And this is called the is not question. Shaka Ausat, June 2013, had a debate, right? And the debate was, the Arab world is facing a publishing crisis. The Arab world is not facing a publication crisis, right? And what's interesting is not the kind of like cowboy standoff on this particular question, but rather how the different people had a different approach to it. One of the arguments was coming from Rana Idris, who runs Dar al-Adab here in Beirut, who was essentially creating a kind of business-based model saying that the Arab world is not, markets of the Arab world are not open to our books. And so we have a publishing crisis. The other guy, who was Muhammad Hashim, who's from a publishing house in Cairo, said essentially, no, the problem is we don't read. Right? So this kind of like standoff between it. And so we decided we're not going to do either of these things, okay? What we're actually going to do is we're just going to go into the street and we're just going to collect data. And we're going to collect data and we're going to see what we find. So the students worked with a mobile data collection program called Fulcrum, which exists in application form on iOS and on Android. And it has both on the left you can see what looks like essentially the data entry form with all the metadata. This is all customized. I've created this for the students to put in information. And then on the right-hand side you see the web interface. And so since we had a variety of different ways of getting at data, sometimes the students went around the streets literally locating what they found. And sometimes they were entering data via this web interface. So they had to learn something about spatial data and how to use a web interface and all that. So the core idea is a creation of a database, right, in which a number of participants can contribute. And we also get out of it a number of spatially inflected individual projects. But what's interesting is that those individual projects are not completely about space and geography and location, but they include a whole lot of ethnography. And you'll see in the posters when you go upstairs that kind of balance between using a map to make an argument and the collation of ethnographic information that come from details. How's my time?
5 minutes, is it?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so we got things like this.
You said an hour.
Okay, we have things like this, and this is actually all from the same database. It looks completely different. These are 3 different visuals providing us with a different idea of something that's actually going on inside of our data set. So I'm working with the idea from Willard McCarthy's Humanities Computing. He has this idea, he kind of does the philosophy of digital humanities, if you want. It's a very interesting book to look at. He calls this project of creating a digital project a process of modeling. Now, modeling here, right, means not trying to describe something as truth, right? He says a modeling process, creating a digital model of something, is really to achieve failure. Now, most humanists don't like that, right, because we don't really want to think of our projects as failing. We think of our projects as succeeding in pushing this. But actually failure in the sense of actually making the whole digital project and the information and the output work is generally kind of a failure. But it's a productive failure, right? In the sense that it allows us to assess how we know what we already thought we knew from received knowledge. Number 2, to know what we don't know already. And number 3, it gives us what we do not already have. It gives us a little bit of that, but it opens up some space. So our project really is not a project that goes off and has lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of findings. Very modest step, but a very interesting and curious modest step with a very carefully created database that sits in the center. So I'm going to go to the question of some findings, and this is going to pique your interest or perhaps put you to sleep, depending on your visual your visual literacy or interest. First findings actually come from the part that's actually the textual part. So Mario in the room, Mario Hoed in the room, student, is actually a computer guy, right? So he's a convert to the English department. We love that. And he did what actually Till was talking about, which is that he went and he scraped a lot of information. So we went to, because I started this with the Library of Congress, what I did is I went and I took all of the bibliographic, automatically using a piece of code, all the things that were published in Beirut from the Library of Congress from 1880 to 2015, which was how many, do you remember?
12,000.
12,000 books. So we have 12,000 books sitting in the Library of Congress that have a lot of information about them that were published in Beirut. Now what can you do when you have a body of information like that? Like Till said, you can find out where were they published, what were the names of the publishers, what were the subjects that were being published, right? We subsequently did this with the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, which is much easier because of their data scheme, but has much less data. We did this with the Hathi Trust, which was brought up before, and we did this with Jaffet Library. So what we have are maps, actually, or kind of maps of data. We have graphs of data, right, in which we can see on the top is the one coming from Jaffet Library, our university library at UB. And this, basically this map shows you the green is the percentage of Arabic publications that exist over a specific moment of time. Red is English and blue is French, is that right?
Yeah.
Right, we have almost no Armenian books published in the library, very, very few in the Jaffa library that we actually possessed in our library. So this is not an indication of publishing in Lebanon, it's an indication of collection practices based on publications that one has in the library. But what becomes extremely interesting is when one correlates that across multiple libraries, one can see, are there trends, right, in specific years or of specific kinds of publications. So the bottom graph is actually goes much further back in time and actually shows you just how different, right, the levels of the quantities of these various languages are. But we can see that around after the Second World War, so around 1948, the level of Arabic publishing as a majority of language just climbs and climbs and climbs at the expense of others. So if you look at Mario's project, he has a lot more data in that that he can explain to you. He's got some graphs like this, right, that allow you to see, again, the sort of stacked graphs, they're called, with numbers. You can see here when publications drop. Publications drop after moments of civic violence in Lebanon. Right? But what's interesting, and one of the findings of our project, is that they rebound immediately the next year. This project works very well with the project on bookstores in the Civil War done by Frangieh Tanous, right? In which she actually talks about how actually there were increasing numbers of bookstores during the war, not decreasing, right? So fascinating ideas, right? But the function of those places as sites of print culture mixed with other things were actually changing. So just to finish up, let me walk you very quickly through our map gallery. So the project site has a time slider on it, which I'll show you in a minute. Has a thing, if you want to contribute, I mean, one of the things I think we really need to do with this project is sort of open it up to a crowdsourcing thing, where the various people in the room who know something about sites of print culture can actually contribute, can talk about. We're particularly interested in the question, or rather it came up, the question of gentrification and what that's done to local and neighborhood level print culture locations. So, so the facets you already saw, maps is our map gallery, so I'm going to look at that. And I'm just going to show you a couple of these, and you'll be able to enjoy looking at them with the other students. Now this is pulling up from the API at Car2DB a live map, right? So it's just taking a couple seconds. You can see my picture will sort of slowly, here I am, slowly appearing in the corner. So the first map is an interactive map of bookstores and publishers, and the interesting thing about this is from archival data and from mobile data collection, is the clear spatial distribution between bookstores, sites of selling books, and sites of publication, of creation, publishers, right, places. You can see the publishers go from, we're here, sorry, we're about right here. We're about right, sorry, thanks.
I switch it off.
Oh, on the side down. Okay. So I guess we're about right here. And what you can see a very clear, right, along the northern coast, the littoral, and in the center of the city is where the bookstores lie. We have then this other whole section, right, and this is actually Dahi Harith, right, which I'm going to talk about in just a second, right, of the green being publishing sector. Here, yellow indicates publishers that are also bookstores, right? Remember, our data is messy, it's incomplete, it's human created, so full of mistakes, right? But what we're looking at here are larger patterns of what's actually might be happening. The same data has been overlaid here on a map of real estate prices in 2014 in Beirut. And what we find here also is very interesting. This is the value now, right, of a first floor apartment in Beirut going from whatever, per square meter from 2,000 to 5,000. And what we find here, interestingly, right, is that there are actually quite a lot of publishers in very expensive locations, right? One of the things that came up in our project that we don't have information on is whether these are rent-controlled apartments or not, right? When we look a little bit later on, we're going to see some other interesting things. The dotted black line is the Hadtamas, the green line. The third one is an interactive map of bookstores that have closed in recent years. And this is actually interesting. I talked about assemblages, right, of sort of layerings of, and this is actually overlaid onto the AUB Neighborhood Initiative maps that have been collected by data about building permits that have been issued in the last 13 years. And one of the things that's interesting that we found is that bookstore closings, for the most part, have not taken place in buildings that have been torn down, but have been actually in locations that have been surrounded by generally higher rising prices, right? And so you can see here, right, if you take a walk these days in Ayatina or down in, what's it called? Anyway, if you walk down this general area to the west of Verdun, and then up in here, you'll see the number of big towers. The blue ones are the big towers, and the red ones are the small towers. Those were made by me. Rana Borsali took on a very interesting project of the idea of the stationery store in Lebanon. We have a problem. What is a maktabi? You're asking what's a book, but what's a maktabi, right? Things are called maktabi, which means like bookstore, it means library, it means librairie. Sometimes it's called a library in English, but they're actually selling things, it's not a lending library, so there's a kind of confusion of terms. Here, she took on specifically the idea of books of stationery stores, and the stationery store as a kind of retirement level way of making money in Lebanon, right? And particularly stationery stores that contain books in them. And her project actually looks at some of those issues. This is actually overlaid onto a map of cultural spaces in Ras Beirut, which is the neighborhood of AUB. This is about comic book stores. This is Sarah Malam, right? And her interest was bookstores that sell comic books. Her book project is about the comic book as luxury item in Lebanon. And one of the things that she finds here, right, is that the locations of like heavily comic book selling bookstores are in very affluent neighborhoods in Beirut. Hala Itani looked into the question of economical or free books. Very interesting spatial distribution here between the secondhand bookshops, right, which sit largely in Hamra, but also a little bit in the east of Beirut, and the purple, which are public libraries, right? We have public libraries on one side of town, we have used and cheaper bookstores. The yellow here actually it means book fairs that take place. This is Noor Baraj, who has an interactive map of cafe bookstores. She's interested in the phenomenon of where they've opened up, how they've actually displayed their books, what function those have. And her project was actually based on a relatively small data set, but she actually went and did sort of site visiting. She sat there and watched people and watched how people interacted with the books in those particular places. This is a static map. This comes from Nicole Masaoud, who did a map about Armenian bookstores in Greater Beirut. The Armenian publication industry and book selling is extraordinarily constrained, right? It's in one neighborhood, it's in Burj Hammoud, but it's a very interesting, it's a whole street, right, of them. It has that kind of quality that in Tripoli they also have like one particular street, which is the bookstore street. And you can go check out her project about Armenian publishing as a way of containing and supporting a community. This is Iman El-Paisi, who was interested in the question of religious books and books about religion. She went to large bookstores to see their religion section, to see how Lebanese confessionalism mapped onto the kind of sales that they have. And this one interacts with questions not only of sectarianism, but also questions of the kind of self-help religious kind of book, which also is in the Christian Bookstore Project, for which we don't have a map. This is Frangiat Tanus's argument about the spatial argument about bookstores opening more during the Civil War than actually after, right? Which completely troubles a narrative of Reconstruction or a narrative sort of a country coming back after that particular point. This is mine. This is actually an interesting one that I evoked earlier on. This is actually a map of the historical expansion of Beirut, which gives us a little bit of indication about where bookstores are located. If you see that whole cluster that we saw of the green publishers here, these publishers, unlike these bookstores and publishers that are in the Hamra region, these particular publishers set in, they sort of got established, right, more in the, not in the 50s, but in the mid-60s, right? And you can sort of see that with the expansion. And this, again, this is Rausche, this would be Anatine here. Okay. And finally, one of the problems of historical GIS projects is how do you bring time into the question, right? Frangiat Tanus had these sort of before the war, after the war. I've actually put up one here, which is an interesting map, which is called a choropleth map. A choropleth is actually a color ramp. So what you can see here is the ones, this is for where we actually have a foundation date of a bookstore or publisher. We can see this is around 1945, the dark blue, going all the way through white and then all the way up to dark red. And the dark red is more the newer ones. What we see here is the phenomenon actually of Dahiya publishing, right? That with the publishing sector, that immediately after the Civil War, when the price of actually having like the license, the price went down, and there a whole lot of publishing happened in this particular. That's just another story. And so the last thing that I will say is I've tried to represent that in a different way. So this is a kind of static representation of time. One of the things that I really wanted to do was to create a time slider. Right? A time slider is where you can kind of move, you know, like a thing. And I managed to do one. We don't have a whole lot of data. It's not very good. It's okay. Again, this is pulling, so the internet connection is not very fast here, but this is pulling on the API, pulling from whatever, California or whatever. And the slider will show up, and you can actually move the bar and see during what time where different kinds of sites of French culture were actually founded, right? So here we have 1860 to 1939, but let's say we were interested in, you know, 1919, and we wanted to go 1919 until, I don't know, 1957, right? And then what will happen is the map will sort of update live. It's just a querying on the database based on the amount of time that I put in the thing. So I invite you to go to see my students' fantastic projects. I mean, really great, okay? And do not let them off the hook, okay? Do not be easy with them. Ask them hard questions. They have a lot of things to offer. And really get into behind the maps, because there's a lot of interesting ethnographic information behind them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all of our panelists. We have a maximum of 10 minutes for discussion, which is brutally short. So I'm going to throw it open to the audience immediately and say, be sure to ask our panelists hard questions and challenging questions. We will circulate the mic. So, questions and comments?
Can we have lunch?
I'm Paul Stefan.
Pleased to meet you.
I was very happy to hear that you make a reference to my work. I wanted to just inform you that there is a bibliography of Lebanese publishing. One is from the beginning of the printing until 1920 by Joumana Bostani, published in France. It's a dissertation in France, and then Hala Bizri, which also did a dissertation in France, but she is here and her copy is available at her place. She did a bibliography of the books published in Lebanon since 1920 until 60. So I think this is because she searched in word catalogs, she searches many how to say catalogs. So I think that her corpus is much exhaustive
Sure.
than yours.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how it matches with the digitally obtained, right? With those, because
She obtained also digitally on
Okay.
WordCat.
from WordCat. Okay, great.
She compiled a lot.
Wonderful.
So I think you should see this. Second, I wanted to say also that the work on bookstore is very important, but you have the problem of defining, as you said, defining what is a bookstore.
Right.
So many of the bookstores are now only paper, how to say,
Like a stationery store. Yeah, right.
Okay. I did a small work about bookstores in Beirut. It was published in Nahar. Maybe it could interest you because
For sure.
my student at the Lebanese University searched in their neighborhood about bookstores, and they described the kind of what kind of books are displayed, and the vitrine, how to say, the window inside, because there is a difference between what you show outside and inside.
This turned out to be very important in religious bookstores in particular,
Yeah,
right? The
right.
religious bookstores put the kind of very interesting things in the window, and yeah, right.
Yes, but,
All kinds do, yeah, sure.
so, I also wanted to say that you said that the publishing institution in the Dahi was after the Civil War.
Well, this.
It is not really accurate
Okay.
because in my thesis then I did this comparison between the date of foundation and the situation in the region. And in fact, the Shia publishing, I think Stefan, I don't know his name, which was who was here in the Orient Institute. Also, he worked about on Shia's publication. So these institutions were founded after the Khomeini revolution, essentially,
Right.
and not in the 19th. At my
Right.
knowledge.
Right. No, I mean that would be really
I'm sorry
interesting
for my
to focus in, right, and to see precisely what the spectrum is there. I mean, we're drawing on Rossini's book here and the data that was published in the back of his book. So. Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure.
The reason bookshops and publishers moved from Beirut to Dahi or to Sharqi, West, East Beirut, was because of the green line, the difficulties of going from one place to another place to operate their businesses, and another reason to be safe. Like Shia moved from Beirut toward most populated areas with domination. The same way with the Christians, like the Antoine bookshop, there was destroyed in downtown Beirut. Hamra bookshop was operating during Civil War, but once it got burned, half of it. So in 1977, he opened a bookshop in Ashrafiyya. But he opened also another bookshop in East Beirut. Why? Because of I believe, this is my belief, that he defines his mission to provide for Christian people in the east of Beirut. That's my take. So. Is there any question?
The lunch. I don't know what you want to. It seems like we should have some
Any other questions or comments? I mean, when I was listening to these papers, it fleshed out for me points that I anticipated would be in common and turned out to be around three keywords. One is user. What is the user of the end product of this scholarship, but also how does it illuminate the users of these books in their contemporary moments of production? And what traces of that use are advantageously investigable through digital means, are open, and you gestured towards the sort of tone or even implicit politics of using this with a theme of books in motion and discourse of crossing borders. What become the new sorts of borders and limitations in the digital environment to workers and to users? And the question of collaboration, possibilities, but also the challenges that it arises. And all three of these key themes also intersect with two words that we used a lot and that I think map interestingly onto those concepts: information and labour. So I wonder perhaps we'll wrap up this panel just with just swinging along the row and see if you have any comments or special critical problems that you've encountered with relation to these three ideas: the user, openness, but also new forms of closure or enclosure, and collaboration. You do too.
I do, okay. Certainly, and these are challenges as you correctly identified them. And particular collaboration is something that seems to be a challenge for humanists, particularly in the field of Middle East, Arabic, Islamic, etc. studies, because we're so used to work on our own and not share sources. There's probably a particular problem within the historians discipline, while a lot of people are really alien to the idea that they spend 10 years of work on an individual source that they start to consider their source, and now they're supposed to share it, and somebody else will, sort of read it. Not to speak of analyzing it and publishing something, but even the act of reading it is somehow contentious. And on the other hand, we're increasingly forced, on the one hand, by particular changes that require us to write sort of collaborative grant applications, that we can't escape the idea of collaboration. As I tried, it surfaced in a number of papers yesterday as well, this question of you have to be adapt to the technologies of production, both in the book world and in the physical item book world. You have to be able to work with a publisher, with a printer, with a copy editor, yada yada, and you have to speak their language in a way in order to make them understand what you want from them. It also means tools of empowering the scholar who knows how to print, right? It has this sort of emancipating aspect that when you're able to print a leaflet, you're actually able to disseminate your thoughts and circumventing a book market. And I think the same is true for the digital remediation of text, including the steep step of acquiring the technological skills necessary for publishing. And it's usually overlooked when we talk about the promises of this new digital age, and we usually don't talk about the costs and the amount of learning and specialization necessary for adopting to this world and adopting the techniques. Personally, apparently, I do believe in openness and sharing everything as openly possible, as legally possible. Sorry. And potentially even illegally, given that, and I think this is something we have to talk about when it comes to copyright and the issue of a particular American hegemony on the idea of copyright. that is enforced through these well-funded digitizing efforts, let's say Hartecast, for instance, even though they're quite open, yet of course, they tend to lean on the side of cautiousness, and thus you have to write them an email each and every time you encounter a book which should be in the public realm. And in order to do that, you have to know English, because of course you can't write them in Arabic email. The interface is in English. So it's not accessible to a large part of the world that would have a huge interest in accessing these works. And I think we definitely have to work towards the goal that the interfaces, the material, etc., is available, accessible to the populations to whom they pertain, if not to say belong. And the routing issue of yesterday, that is of course something we have to talk about.
Yeah, I think these 3 points that you mentioned, they connect very well. And I think in order to also use the digital means for scholarly work, these have to be connected. There is, I mean, the whole digital age brings with itself a different language, like or different languages such as XML or science that nobody can read. I still told, like you mentioned that yesterday in the evening, in a way that these XML signs are to many of us what the Chinese artists' fictional signs were to the visitors of that exhibition. And similarly, we are kind of lost when we encounter them. And there are definitely better examples than XML where you can still read what's been done there. Also, I would say that if you have the users and the collaboration, it's really a shift. Who is the user of what? I mean, there's this constant interaction with the codified knowledge that is already there and the new formats, and then again, with the knowledge that is there about how you build, let's say, a digital edition, and then the content that should be put in there, and what is content and what is structure really depends on your perspective, and in a way we all become users then. And there is collaboration necessary, especially with regard to digital editions. You not only have to have someone who's able to read Arabic, who's able to then read and write XML, but you also need someone who has knowledge of codicology and of catalogization. And in order to make use of all these images that are created of these things, collaboration is necessary. Maybe because it's different groups who have to collaborate, and there are not necessarily printers anymore. There's no established workflow as at the printing press, but we have to kind of do that ourselves as well, or we have to be more hands-on than before, because before they knew their work and we knew our part of the work. This is all in the flux at the moment, and I find on a side note, what I find really noteworthy is that in this panel it's the first time that we actually have a book and not the image of a book in front of the audience.
Touché.
Yesterday's panel,
Who brought one?
the panel on,
Oh, yes, that's right.
was it, what was? Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
So my way of answering that, I think the question about openness and user is really interesting in collaboration, but I actually say if you folded all of that together, you would end up with public, right? And with all the complications that public really means, so one of the conversations that's going on right now has been going on for several years, pretty powerful conversations in UK and the United States, but also increasingly in Europe, is what is a public humanities? What is the face, right? And so what's interesting about the digital is that not just encourages but requires collaboration, right? It's not just that it encourages openness, but it requires openness to function, right? It's not just that. So for me, what I like about the project that we did with my students, and the idea really here was to course embed the digital humanities project, right? Not have it be something that I went and hired a bunch of people, and there were people who would critique me for that, saying that I used the labor of my classroom to do this project. But in my opinion, this project belongs to all of us, right? So it belongs to the people in the room, and the imperative of the class was never to get more data. The imperative was to learn from the data that we have, right? And to learn what that means in today's world, and to take examples from that. So for me, it was really important that, and I mean, what is on my mind is what's next with this, right? I mean, one of the problems with the digital project is that they sometimes kind of reach their own end point, right? People, they get tired of it, or I don't know, they don't have more material, or they don't have the means to keep it going. I mean, I think that this particular project would be best reinserted, re-injected into the public sphere in Lebanon. I mean, I really think that we have the possibility of doing some interesting public humanities here, because, I mean, it has to be not only in English, it has to, the site has to be in multiple languages, it has to be known to people, but there's the idea of a kind of common data set around which one has sort of different forms of curation, for me at least, gives it or allows it to move out into the world and to mean different things for different people, right? To contain or to hold multiple narratives. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. Let's go and talk to David's collaborators over lunch. Thank you.